On Friday on the SoFi Weekly podcast, we had a long discussion around SoFi's rate of innovation and product releases in general. And over the past few days, I plotted all of their press releases over the past 5 years onto a single timeline to take a look at the rate that SoFi is releasing new products. And the trend that I found is somewhat concerning. I'm going to talk about it all in this video. Let's jump right in. First, there's a few things that I want to clear off the bat before we even go into the data. Number one is that we don't have all the information. So please take this video with a grain of salt. I'm just operating with information that's publicly available through press releases, through earnings presentations, and that's made available to us through their investor relations page. And on that note, one thing to add is that many of the updates to the app itself or from a technology perspective don't necessarily get highlighted in press releases. For example, one of the things that investors have been waiting on for multiple years is a Zelle integration, and there was no press release around the Zelle integration. It was just a tweet. So sometimes it's through tweets or posts on social media. Sometimes it's not indicated at all. And sometimes features are rolled out behind a feature flag. So you get the new app update and you don't even know that there's a new feature on it until they turn it on. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be missed in this analysis. So please, please, please take it with a grain of salt. We don't have all the information here. Number two is there's no one single person who is wholly responsible for the growth of the tech platform, as well as the slowdown of that technological innovation or product releases over time. You have to think of SoFi as a whole. Their technology team consists of hundreds, if not thousands, of employees who all contribute to driving that roadmap forward. The third disclaimer that I want to make is that we don't know what the backend architecture looks like. So this goes along with the first point around we don't have all the information. It's always difficult to consider the complexity of integrations for companies that are acquired over time. Over the past 5 years, we've seen several acquisitions that SoFi has made, which we're going to cover. And all of these companies might have certain architecture behind the scenes. And the effort required to consolidate all of those in one roof is quite difficult, much more difficult than it would initially appear, because there's a couple of things that you need to consider. So number one, you need to do a lift and shift. You need to basically have a full tech migration. But also number two, you need to consider the knowledge transfer. You need to consider the documentation, the internal processes that might happen. And on top of that, you need to do so in such a way that retains the top talent so that the people who actually built that initial solution are still there and still have the contextual knowledge to drive that forward so that you don't lose a lot in that brain drain that usually happens post mergers. I've been a part of mergers. They're always somewhat messy because you always have people that are looking for a payout that just leave the company. A lot of the contextual knowledge leaves with them because they're the people that actually built the tool. So all of these are contributing factors to the velocity of new launches that SoFi is having, especially when you consider how many post-merger integrations that SoFi has to have if they want to be fully vertically integrated with regards to having all of their tech in-house. Now, finally, the last thing to consider, the last disclaimer I want to make just before diving into this is with regards to the company's strategy. There could be multiple large projects on the go currently being worked on behind the scenes that we have no awareness around. And I want you to take this with a grain of salt because similar to 2019, they released a ton of stuff in a very quick succession to one another because they might have been working on these things for years and years behind the scenes. And so immediately they might release something and it might be massive. And you might think to yourself, how do they get this done? It's because they have research and development teams that are working on this stuff for years behind the scenes. And that could very well be the case this year, which is why we see a lag in the technological innovation aspect. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to make this video is because it's an important aspect of the business to call out, even if it is just anecdotally, even if it is just on a surface level. And even after highlighting all the disclaimers that I just went through, it's because the pace of technological innovation and product development is supposed to be a differentiating factor for SoFi being a disruptor in the industry. One thing I mentioned on the podcast on Friday is that we can't expect SoFi to disrupt legacy financial institutions if they're operating in the same product rollout pace that a Bank of America or a Wells Fargo is operating under, right? They need to be consistently innovating. They need to be moving much faster. And as a result, we as a retail shareholder base have a higher expectation on the company to execute, essentially saying I have more expectations on SoFi than I would have on a Wells Fargo, because ultimately this stuff is reflected in the revenue. It's reflected in the profitability metrics, in the member additions, and in their overall growth rate. And I understand that I might be biased because I'm coming from a technology product background, but everything in my head really starts at that product layer. If the product is best in class, then that's going to attract members and that's going to attract revenue and profitability and ultimately the growth rate, right? And so you have to tackle the problem at its core. And what you have with SoFi at its core is this company that can consistently innovate. Okay, so let's dive right in now to take a look at some of these aspects in their timeline. So what I've done in this timeline here is I've taken a couple of their earnings presentations and press releases, which, like I said, I've almost exclusively worked off of these press releases on their investor relations page. And this does not tell a full story, but it is what the company themselves chooses to highlight. Because what you have here for the last 2 years, they do this year in review, and every month they choose to highlight one or two of their major wins. And I really wanted to take a look deeper into that to see if we can find some signal. And one other thing I note just before I dive into the specifics, when I talk about product releases, I'm mainly referring to initiatives that affect the app, the user experience, and the product offering as a whole. Basically, I'm biasing towards everything that has software engineers involved. So, for example, if SoFi increases the APY on one of their offerings, or they partner with Jason Tatum, or they launch the TGL Golf League, these don't really involve software engineers. This is mainly marketing initiatives. They're not pure product rollouts, right? And so when I look at this, I'm really biasing towards product rollouts on their technology platform. Now, one of the other points that I made on Friday, just very quickly before we jump in, is that it seems as though the velocity of SoFi's press releases has not died down, but the percentage of the product portion of those releases has died down. So maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we saw SoFi highlight product releases much more frequently, whereas today they're highlighting marketing stuff, they're highlighting awards that they won, they're highlighting all these recognitions that they're having, or maybe milestones that they're hitting, not necessarily pure technology rollout. Okay, so let's start first and foremost at 2019. And in 2019, we can see, like I said, the majority of SoFi's experience was built during this time. So in January 2019, their home timeline was launched. And then very quickly in Q1, they launched SoFi Money, SoFi Relay, and SoFi Invest, and SoFi Home Loans. All of this stuff was launched in Q1 of 2019. These are four major product lines that they have in their financial services platform. And then towards the back half of the year, they launched in-school loans, they launched credit card, and they launched SoFi Rewards. So basically, the entirety of SoFi's financial services was launched in this 24 months between 2019 and 2020. Very, very quick succession, very quick progress here. Now, what happened in 2020 was that two individuals left. So you had David Sprouse that left, and you have Steven Sykes that left, and they basically left to go start public.com. I made a full video on this back in 2023. I'm going to attach the link to that video in the description and also at the end of this one. I'm also going to attach a short clip from that video that talks about this specifically. From a headcount perspective, towards the end of 2020, SoFi lost two key members that had contributed to their product launches. David Sprouse was the senior director of software engineering. He left the company in December of 2020. He had been with the company for over 6.5 years. Also, Steven Sykes left in October of 2020. He was the VP business lead for the Invest segment, and he had been with SoFi for almost 4 years. Both of these individuals were instrumental in developing this product roadmap that SoFi had released consistently every single quarter from 2019 all the way to the end of 2020 when both of these gentlemen left. They went to public.com. They're essentially an investing app, very modern, very much geared towards younger demographics. David Sprouse is the VP of engineering, and Steven Sykes is the chief operating officer at Public. Okay, so now we move on to 2021. Like I said, this is only from press releases. SoFi became a public company in 2021. They had the SPAC merger with IPOE. In March, they launched the SoFi credit card, and they also acquired Golden Pacific Bancorp. They gave members early access to IPOs. They launched auto loan refinancing through Lantern in April. They partnered with Coursera. They launched the weekly dividend ETF. They launched 2-day early paycheck for SoFi Money. And back in June, they named Derek White as the new CEO of Galileo. And they also added a couple of people to their board. Here, I'm just going to highlight with a little green check mark the ones that I think involve software engineers or that are essentially tech releases. If they're launching a credit card offering, that has a contributing factor on the financial services. So that gets a check mark. Early access to IPOs gets a check mark. Auto loans through Lantern, that requires an integration or at the very least a partnership, but let's put a check mark for now. The 2-day early paycheck, that definitely gets a check mark here. We can see some progress in 2021 2021. Of course, nothing like 2019, right? 2019 was when the majority of their company was built from a financial services point of view. This entire slide gets check marks here. Like I said, this is probably the most instrumental year, especially the most instrumental year for SoFi's financial services business, because everything that we can see was launched back here. Let's now move on to 2022. This becomes a little bit easier because we have these year in reviews. So in January, SoFi received regulatory approval to become a nationally chartered bank. They launched a marketing campaign. They introduced margin trading. I think that gets the little green check mark here. And they also launched the checking and savings. I'll put a little check mark on that as well. In March, they acquired Technisys. Every acquisition is going to get a little check mark because of the integration work required. SoFi Money launches same day ACH transfers. I would give that a check mark as well. And also in March, they also launched their cryptocurrency purchases for direct deposit members. So we're seeing a lot of progress here in the first half of 2022. In April, they launched credit cards with 3% cash back. They also have 1.25 APY for direct deposit. And they also announced some changes to their board of directors. So here we had Clay Wilkes, who was founder of Galileo, along with two other gentlemen, leave the board of directors. And in June is when Jeremy Rischel joined the company as a CTO. So I have this red line here to denote a change of leadership in their tech platform. In May, they rolled out credit score monitoring and auto tracking for Relay. That gets a check mark for sure. In June, SoFi Invest adds 4.5 hours to its trading day. SoFi Invest launches a couple of ETFs. So here in October, SoFi Plus is rolled out to members with direct deposit. SoFi Invest begins options trading. And then in December, SoFi launches early access to Pay in 4. So if we zoom out of here, we can see a really dense stream of product related technology releases, right? Everything with a check mark has to do with their technology or with their product in some way or another. Let's move on to 2023. And I think this is somewhat where the pace dies down. The announcements back in 2022 all highlight some product and technology releases, which we can see here. In 2023, you see some achievements. They're awarded 5 banking awards. That's great. SoFi Checking and Saving turns 1. That doesn't really mean anything. It's just a milestone. SoFi Money offers up to $2 million FDIC insurance. SoFi named Fast Company's annual list of world's most innovative companies. So you don't see any major product releases here that's in their year in review that they want to talk about. Acquisition of Wyndham Capital back in April. Of course, that gets a check mark. SoFi launches SoFi Travel powered by Expedia. SoFi at Work launches student loan verification service. This is a really big one for SoFi at Work, and we're seeing this really play a big part with the Chipotle partnership and with other partnerships. The Face of Finance marketing campaign, great. SoFi Invest offers the IPO. I didn't put a check mark really onto this because it's just another IPO offering. I already put a check mark when they launched. So back in 2021, when they launched IPOs, that got a check mark. I'm not going to put a check mark for everything related to IPOs because you also have in September the ARM and the CART IPOs. August, you had Taylor Swift and Beyonce at SoFi Stadium, nothing really technology related there. And then you also have another award here. In October, you have another marketing campaign, another ETF, and then it reaches 7 million members. And so here you can see the volume or the lack thereof of the product related releases that they choose to highlight. Like I said, a lot of stuff might be happening behind the scenes that they're not advertising, but compared to 2022, you can see a lot more check marks here, a lot more product and technology aspect related releases. And so here in 2023, it massively dies down. Now in 2024, there are a couple of things here. So I added a check mark to the small business financing marketplace. I'll even add a check mark to the alternative investments. They rolled out Zelle, they rolled out dark mode. We'll see if they choose to talk about those things. Like I said, there's stuff that are shared in tweets. There's stuff that are shared just in the app updates if I go to the App Store, for example. But in terms of what they choose to highlight, 2019 through 2022, you had a massive amount of product-related rollouts or of tech-related rollouts in general. And 2023, that dies down. You see a lot more marketing campaigns, you see a lot more partnerships, but fewer product-related rollouts. And this is exactly what we're highlighting here when we're talking about the pace of innovation at SoFi. Now, one thing I will say in 2023, there were a couple of back-end related stuff with regards to Galileo, with regards to consolidation after these acquisitions. And so a lot of the work could be work in progress for stuff that is coming out soon. A lot of the work could be stuff in the back end that we don't necessarily see to make their app run faster or to handle more of a load. And you have to also consider their strategy, right? Their strategy could be that they don't want to spread themselves out too thin to roll a lot of stuff out because then they can't support the growth of all of those things. They could be focusing focused on profitability as well, right? Like they could say, we don't want to launch a tax product or SMB products because that's going to be a money loser, at least to start with right now. We want to just focus on getting credit cards right. We want to just focus on getting the Invest platform up and running. And something else that I'll mention here is that they had some throwaway work with regards to crypto. They launched crypto, they added new coins for crypto, they had support for crypto. And then very shortly after getting that bank charter, they had to deprecate everything regarded to crypto. Obviously, that's not great from a product release perspective. And frankly, it's much easier for me to see the decline in the product rollout velocity over the past couple of years because when I started investing in SoFi in 2021, they were launching new product offerings left and right that felt like. And that was one of the positives of investing in SoFi of saying, okay, well, look how fast this company is growing. Of course, they're going to be outpacing a lot of these incumbents and even a lot of these fintechs in the market. But right now, the thing that started all of this was a post on Twitter where it had been a 1 year anniversary of level one options being promised to investors. And so when you're making promises for products that are going to launch and a year passes and you still don't have that product, or when you roll out a product and it's lackluster and it's laggy and it's not very usable, people start to ask questions because you have hundreds, if not even over 1,000 people on your technology team, on your engineers, your designers, your product managers. And so obviously you're going to have high scrutiny to roll things out because what are all those people doing? What are your internal processes look like? What are your release cadences look like? One thing you can see here, if you look at SoFi in the App Store, you can very easily look at the version history. You can see the pace that they're rolling stuff out. So about every week or every 2 weeks, they have a new release that's coming out, a new build for their app, but they have this boilerplate language on all of these releases. They don't really tell us what they're releasing or what's included in that build. It's just the same thing over and over again. And I think that a good start would be for these builds or these releases, these new versions of the app, once they get rolled out, to at least tell us what's new in this version versus the last one. And a lot of apps don't do this, but when they do release new functionality, they'll usually highlight it here. And the fact that SoFi doesn't highlight it here makes it a little bit more difficult for me to comb through and actually disprove the fact that their velocity has fallen because they're not actively talking about new product releases as they were in 2019 and 2020 and 2021. And so I can only operate with the information that's publicly available to me. And the fact that management is making promises that are a year out doesn't really help their case, right? And this is important, not necessarily to critique the company negatively, but to keep them accountable to the promises they're making to their shareholders. Because by keeping them accountable, it shows that we as retail investor base are engaged in what they're releasing and we're invested in the growth of the company going forward. If you disagree with anything in this video, or if you have thoughts or opinions, please let me know in the comments below. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.